Picture this. It is 3 in the morning, somewhere north of the Bering Strait in the middle of November. Outside the steel hull of a 420-foot icebreaker, the wind chill is sitting at minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The sea spray is freezing to every horizontal surface the instant it lands, and the ship is grinding through first-year ice with that slow, heavy, percussive rhythm of a hull backing up, lining up, and ramming forward again. The whole vessel is groaning around you. The deck above is shaking, and somewhere on the third deck, in a narrow bunk behind a blackout curtain, a Coast Guard machinery technician who came off watch 4 hours ago is dead asleep. Did not stir, will not stir for another 4 hours. How on earth does anyone sleep through that? That is exactly what we are going to find out today. Hi, my name is Jack, and this is Life at Sea, the channel where we go inside the lives of the people who actually live and work on the water. The icebreakers we are talking about today are the proper polar-rated ships. We are not talking about a Baltic ferry that pushes through a bit of brash ice in February. We are talking about vessels like the U.S. Coast Guard cutters Polar Star and Healy, the Canadian Coast Guard's CCGS Louis S. Saint Laurent, the German research icebreaker Polarstern, the Finnish Arctia fleet operating out of Helsinki, and Britain's HMS Protector down in the Antarctic. The ships that are built to keep working when the air outside will kill you in under 5 minutes. So, how does the crew sleep? The reality of minus 40 degrees outside on a steel ship in the dark. Let us paint the picture properly first. Sea ice in winter sits at surface temperatures of around minus 20 to minus 40 degrees Celsius. Add wind, and the wind chill on the bridge wing of a working icebreaker very routinely drops to that minus 40 mark, whether in degrees Fahrenheit or in degrees Celsius, because the two scales famously meet at that number. During a winter cruise on the U.S. CGC Healy in the Chukchi and Bering Seas, the crew were dealing with wind speeds over 70 miles an hour and a wind chill of minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And that is not an unusual day on a working polar deployment. The Polarstern, the flagship of German polar research, is rated for sustained operations down to minus 50 degrees Celsius. The Healy is rated to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The Polar Star will do whatever Operation Deep Freeze asks of her. This past season, that meant a 146-day mission to the Ross Sea, covering 23,000 miles. Spray is the other constant. In a polar storm, every drop of seawater that lands on the deck freezes solid in seconds. Across the surface of an icebreaker, just a couple of centimeters of ice buildup adds up to more than 100 tons of extra weight, and if it builds unevenly on one side, it can heel the ship over and capsize her within hours. So the crew are out on deck with mallets, shovels, and steam hoses, breaking the ice off as fast as it forms. Most veteran ice navigators will tell you plainly that this is the single most relentless deck task in the entire merchant and naval worlds. Bare skin in that environment is not a slow danger. Touch a metal handrail with an ungloved hand, and the moisture in your skin freezes to the steel in a second. Then there is the motion. Here is something a lot of people do not realize. An icebreaker is, paradoxically, a terrible ship for open water. The hull is rounded, there is no proper keel sticking down, there are no stabilizer fins, because anything that protrudes will get ripped off by the ice. Which means, in even a moderate swell out in the open Bering or the Drake Passage, an icebreaker rolls heavily. Ask any old Arctia chief mate who has done the transit between Helsinki and the ice edge, and they will tell you the worst sleep of the entire voyage is the bit before you get into the pack. because once the ship is in the ice itself acts like a giant blanket on the water. The wave motion damps out almost completely. The ship becomes one of the steadiest things you have ever stood on. Then there is the dark. In the high Arctic in midwinter and the deep Antarctic in midsummer alike, the sun either does not rise or does not set for weeks at a time. In the Bering and Chukchi in November, the sun is up for maybe 3 or 4 hours of gray twilight, and then it is night again. So the crew end up working, eating, sleeping, and waking up again with no natural daylight cue to anchor the body to, which is exactly why the watch schedule has to be airtight. The only thing telling your body what time of day it is the ship itself. And then there is the sound. Backing, lining up, ramming. Backing, lining up, ramming. The hull grinds. Chunks of ice the size of cars scrape under the keel and hit the propellers. The whole steel structure resonates. Scientists working on the Healy famously describe the rhythm down in the bow as the percussion section of an amateur orchestra. So how does anyone sleep through that? The ship itself and how it holds the warmth in. The first answer is the heating envelope. A modern polar icebreaker is a double-hulled steel structure, heavily insulated, with the accommodation block deliberately built high in the superstructure away from the worst of the ice-breaking impacts at the bow. The hull plating itself is heated. The engines on a vessel like Polar Star or Healy produce enormous quantities of waste heat, and that heat is circulated through closed water loops built into the inside of the bow plates, partly to weaken the ice at the contact point, partly to stop the steel itself going so cold that it becomes brittle. On the larger nuclear-powered icebreakers, the surplus thermal output is so vast that heated steam is routinely run through external handrails and under deck plating, which is why an experienced bosun on a working icebreaker will never grab a bare metal handrail without a glove, and why the deck does not turn into a skating rink the moment spray lands on it. Some of these ships also run a bow bubbler system, a network of holes in the hull just below the waterline that vents compressed air to push the ice away from the steel. Older Coast Guard heavy icebreakers had heated water jets at the bow to weaken the ice before contact. Most veteran chief engineers will tell you the heated bow is doing 2 jobs at once. It helps the ship break ice, and it keeps the front of the accommodation block from going cold from the inside out. Inside the accommodation block, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning is its own specialist field. The new Canadian polar icebreaker uses a Knud-E Hansen design installed by Barrier Marine. The U.S. Polar Security Cutter program went with bronzework heat transfer of the Netherlands, triple glazed windows, urethane foam packed between the outer hull plate and the inner cabin lining, heat-traced fuel and water pipes, the works. The result, honestly, is that a crew member can sit in a stateroom in his socks while the bridge wing 20 feet away is at minus 40 degrees Celsius. The rack itself and the cabin around it. Inside the cabin, things are tighter than you might think. The Maritime Labor Convention of 2006 sets the legal minimums for seafarer accommodation across most of the world's commercial fleet. On a vessel of any reasonable size, a single cabin must give the occupant at least 4.5 to 7 square meters of floor space, depending on tonnage. The bunk itself, what the U.S. Coast Guard and Royal Navy both call the rack, has to be at least 190 by 70 centimeters. On the Polar Star and the Healy, you have officer staterooms with 1 or 2 occupants up top and enlisted berthing further down with bunks stacked 2 or 3 high. The bunks have lee rails fitted to any upper tier, which is an MLC requirement on any double-tier bed at sea. The decisive piece of gear, though, is the rack curtain. Heavy, fire retardant, blackout rated with sliding panels and Velcro down the middle. The crew sleep with it closed every single time. 2 reasons. 1, Your watchmate is on the opposite rotation, so he is up and moving when you are off, and vice versa. 2. The passageway light never goes off, and in polar summer the sun does not either. The curtain is what turns a steel box in a fluorescent lit corridor into something that feels genuinely like a bedroom. The watch schedule that protects the sleep. The third piece is the rotation. Deep sea ships traditionally run a 3-watch system, 4 hours on, 8 hours off, rotating through bridge and engine watches around the clock. The U.S. Navy and U.S. Coast Guard have moved a lot of their ships, the icebreakers included, onto circadian watch bills, the 3 and 9, or the 5 and 10, which were developed at the Naval Postgraduate School specifically to let the body settle into a stable 24-hour rhythm instead of drifting. The Royal Navy traditionally ran a different system on its submarines: 2 on, 4 off through the day, and 3 on, 6 off overnight. HMS Protector, the Royal Navy's ice patrol ship in the Antarctic, runs a 3-watch system with the crew rotating roughly 2 months on and 1 month off, ashore in South Africa. About 66 of her 100-strong ship's company are on board at any given moment. The Polar Stern, with up to 44 crew and 55 researchers, runs her own watches around the labs as well as the bridge. Now, the underlying logic of all of this is the same. Nobody is awake the full duration of a polar deployment. The schedule is built so that every single crew member, from the captain down, gets a protected, predictable sleep block in a darkened, insulated, curtain-sealed bunk every single day. Honestly, the rhythm of a well-run watch is its own kind of beautiful. Now, the engineering only gets you so far. The rest is the small habits. Walk through a Healy or a Polar Stern stateroom and you will see the same pattern of personal kit in every rack. There is almost always a curtain liner clipped inside the standard issue rack curtain. Specialist suppliers like Fleet Sheets and Rack Sheets exist for exactly this reason, because civilian bedding does not fit the odd narrow dimensions of a ship rack. And crew want the extra blackout layer and the row of pockets stitched into the inside of the liner. The pockets hold a paperback, a phone, a head torch, and a packet of foam earplugs. The earplugs are not optional. Some hands prefer the construction-grade earmuffs that swallow the low-frequency rumble of ramming through ice, which the foam plugs do not quite block. Others swear by white noise on cheap headphones, because the brain accepts the familiar sound and lets the ramming fade into the background. The most I see crew on the Polar Stern, who spent a full year drifting frozen into the Arctic ice, kept whole playlists curated specifically for sleep. The other universal habit is securing your gear. The Healy's own Embarked Scientist Handbook is explicit about this. The ship will roll, will pitch, will vibrate hard during ice breaking, and any personal item that is not properly stowed will end up across the cabin and possibly damaged or dangerous. So every photograph is taped to the bulkhead, every mug lives on a non-slip mat, every laptop goes in a drawer with a positive latch before the curtain closes. Ask any old polar engineer and he will tell you the first thing a new hand learns is the lashing. And then there is the mattress itself. Standard Navy and Coast Guard issue mattresses are firm and thin, designed to last a long deployment and meet strict fire regulations. So just about every veteran rating brings their own memory foam topper aboard at the start of a contract, rolled up under one arm, and unrolls it onto the rack as the first act of unpacking. Officially, on a lot of ships, the topper is unauthorized. Unofficially, every chief in the chain of command has one too. Then there are the smaller rituals, the kettle in the galley running on a permanent slow simmer so any off-watch crew member can pour an instant coffee at any hour, the accountability log on Healy, where every soul on board checks in at 11 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon, which then leaves the rack genuinely sacred outside those two windows. The photograph of a partner or a child taped to the inside of the locker door. The pair of dry socks folded under the pillow, because cold feet wake you up faster than any noise will. And then, the historical comparison most people miss. Compare any of that to the Fram in 1893, when Fritjof Nansen had his crew sleeping in tiered wooden bunks around a single coal stove in the middle of a saloon, while the ship was deliberately frozen into the Arctic pack for 3 years. The fact that a modern icebreaker crew can pull a curtain, set an alarm, and fall asleep at a comfortable 20 degrees Celsius with minus 40 degrees Celsius outside is one of the quieter miracles of modern shipbuilding. Now, look, this would not be a Life at Sea video if we did not also give you the other side of all of this. So let us be honest for a moment, because this part is genuinely serious. The system works. The system also has limits. Sleep on a working polar icebreaker is protected, but it is not always deep. The backing and ramming sequence is the loudest impact most of the bunks ever feel, and even with the curtain closed and the plugs in, there are nights where a particularly hard ram will pull you out of REM and your body will not get all the way back. Then there are the engineering casualties. The Healy had an electrical fire in her engineering spaces in July 2024 that ended her Arctic patrol 6 weeks in and sent her home to Seattle. She had a similar fire in 2020 that took out her starboard propulsion. When something like that happens, nobody is sleeping for a while. There is also the mental cost. The Antarctic winter over literature is unambiguous about this. The condition researchers call winter over syndrome, depression, insomnia, irritability, diminished cognitive performance, mild dissociation, affects a real fraction of personnel on long polar deployments. The so-called third quarter phenomenon, documented across Antarctic stations, submarine deployments, and space analog missions, says that somewhere past the halfway mark of a long isolation, novelty fades, the end still looks far, and mood drops. Modern operators take this seriously. They build rotations around it. They keep satellite calls home as reliable as they can make them. But you cannot engineer it away completely. Then there is the family side. Polar Star did 146 days in Antarctica this past season. Polarstern operates an average of 305 days a year. HMS Protector is at sea about 330 days out of every 365. Most veteran chief engineers will tell you plainly that the hardest part of any polar contract is not the cold or the noise or the food. It is the WhatsApp call where your kid has grown half an inch since the last one, or the call you cannot get through because the weather is bad and the satellite link is down. This would not be a Life at Sea video if we pretended any of that was not real. And the standard, honestly, is still going up. The US Coast Guard's old heavy icebreakers, Polar Star and Polar Sea, were built in the 1970s. The replacement, the Polar Security Cutter program, will produce vessels around 460 feet and roughly 22,900 tons, larger than the Healy, with HVAC and accommodation packages designed from scratch for crew habitability rather than retrofitted around 50-year-old hulls. Canada has 2 new Polar Class II icebreakers under construction, the CCGS Arpatuk being built at Helsinki Shipyard under Davy ownership, and the CCGS Imnariuak going up at Vancouver Shipyards. Both are designed to carry 100 personnel with full single berth accommodation and a moon pool for year-round Arctic science. The Swedish Maritime Administration and the Finnish Transport Infrastructure Agency are jointly developing the Aker ARC-130S, the next generation Baltic escort icebreaker and potentially the first methanol-fueled icebreaker in the world. The Polar Stern replacement is now under contract at Reederei F. Lais, the same Bremerhaven shipping line that ran the original Polar Stern for over 40 years. There is also a quieter shift happening in the propulsion itself. The new generation, the Aker designs, the Polar Security Cutters, the Diefenbaker class, are all moving to diesel-electric azipod drives running on LNG or methanol, vastly smoother and quieter than the old gas turbine plants on the 1970s heavy icebreakers, which, when you are trying to sleep 3 decks above the engine room, matters in a way the public spec sheets never quite capture. Compare a Coast Guard rack on the Polar Star, a Royal Navy berth on Protector, a German researcher's cabin on the Polar Stern, and an Arctia officer's accommodation on the new Aker design. 4 very different traditions, all converging on the same idea, which is that the people doing this work deserve a quiet, warm, dark place to sleep, which, when you think about it, is genuinely impressive progress. So, here is what it all comes down to. The reason an icebreaker crew sleeps comfortably at -40 is not one magic piece of kit. It is the heating envelope, and the cabin, and the rack curtain, and the earplugs, and the watch schedule, and the rotation that gets them off the ship before the body breaks. The whole system, layered, redundant, and quietly remarkable. And the thing that has stayed with me from looking into all of this, honestly, is that the crews who do this work do not actually describe the cold as the hardest part. They describe the noise as something they grow to find comforting, the way some people sleep better next to a busy road. It is a system built layer by layer to make -40 outside genuinely irrelevant to the human in the rack. And once you understand that, you will never look at one of those red-painted icebreakers in port quite the same way again.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to Life at Sea for a lot more content just like this. And if you have ever served on an icebreaker, sailed the polar regions, worked Operation Deep Freeze, or known someone who did, drop it in the comments below. I would genuinely love to hear it. Thanks for watching.